Welcome back to the Now Morning Show, 20 minutes to the hour of 7 o'clock, and we are going into a conversation where we're going to get some things cleared up, talking about rabies management in Trinidad and Tobago. Joining us this morning is Dr. Lisa Musai, the Acting Chief Veterinary Officer. Good morning, Doctor, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us this morning, because this is a conversation that I think sometimes we tend to sweep to the wayside, and we have to be so careful that we remain informed and we're aware of rabies in Trinidad and Tobago. Sure. There's this continuous misconception that rabies is just something with dogs or animals, well, animals obviously, but this morning we're talking about bats.
Yes. So there are two types of rabies, right? There is the dog-transmitted rabies. That's the one that the world knows about, right, and you see it in the movies and so on. And there's the bat-transmitted rabies, which is the type of rabies that we have in Trinidad.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
So, if I may, what's the difference between the two?
Right. So, rabies is a viral disease, and it is manifested clinically in two different ways. There is the furious form, and that's the dog-transmitted form where the animal is aggressive and hyperactive and so on. And there's the paralytic form, which is the one that is spread by vampire bats. And that is the type that we have in Trinidad. And the animals that are most likely affected are livestock animals, so your cattle, sheep and goat and so on. And they tend to have like an ascended paralysis. So there's weakness and the difficulty to walk, difficulty to swallow, difficulty to breathe and so on. And that's the type that we see in Trinidad.
That's absolutely heartbreaking for an animal to experience something like that. So, you know, when you say vampire bats, immediately everybody gets really apprehensive because of the connotation with vampires in particular. But what's the status of vampire bats in Trinidad and Tobago?
Right. So in Trinidad, we have many different species of bats, right? You have your fruit bats, you have your insect-eating bats and so on. But we also have vampire bats. And there are two types that are found in Trinidad. There's the common vampire bat and there's the white-winged vampire bat. And they have both been found to be vectors or transmitters spreading the disease of rabies.
Wow. Is it fair to say that they may be considered pests in some ways as well when it comes to transmitting?
Well, they have an important role to play in ecology as well, right? Because they do various other good things. They like seed disposal, pollination. So they play a good role in the biology and ecology as important animals, right? The downfall is that they can spread the disease, and not all vampire bats have the disease to be able to spread it. So it's a touch and go thing. But if your animal gets bitten by a vampire bat, what we do recommend is that you contact the anti-rabies unit in the Ministry of Agriculture, and I have a phone number and an email address I can give you for that. And we will come in and immediately investigate, right? And this is an appeal not only to farmers, but also to hunters, because hunting dogs that are out in the forest are in close proximity to these bats as well.
Yeah. So when you said we, of course, you're referring to the anti-rabies units in the ministry. What exactly is the role and responsibility of the units?
Right. So the anti-rabies unit, basically their major role is to help us meaning the veterinary services, in the prevention and control of rabies in Trinidad. And they do that by, one, investigating bat biting complaints that come in from farmers and hunters. Two, they help us, the veterinary officers, with our vaccination programs. We vaccinate our livestock for rabies throughout the country. They do a lot of public awareness, so they will go to schools and they will go to the rural communities and speak about rabies and make persons more aware of what it is, you know, the signs that you see in animals. For instance, well, I spoke about some of the clinical signs already, but one of the common ones that you see is that when that animal is having difficulty in swallowing, a lot of farmers think that the animal is choking.
Right.
So they would put their hands in the mouth of the animal, in the cow, for instance, and try to assist, which is what we do not recommend, because rabies can be spread by infected saliva of an animal. So you do not want to do that. So if you see those type of clinical signs, you need to call us at the vet services, at anti-rabies unit, and we will come and investigate and assist in the situation.
I wasn't ready for that. Spread by infected saliva as well, which is so important. Yes. And that's so challenging because once you see an animal, you think the animal is choking, you immediately want to save. So it's being able to make that distinction as to whether or not it could be rabies or they could actually be choking. Now, you mentioned there's outreach in schools and so forth. What about outreach when it comes to our farming communities who, from what you shared with us this morning, really can be affected by this?
Yes, so when we get bat biting complaints, what the anti-rabies unit is, they will go and investigate that farm, that case, and they would check surrounding premises. So surrounding farms as well will be investigated. We'll speak to the farmers and let them know what we're looking at, because it means, therefore, that the vampire bats have targeted that particular area.
Right.
So we would go in and do our further investigation. We'd also go in and start vaccinating the animals in that area as well to help protect them.
Now, what advice would you have for those whose animals have come into contact with a vampire bat and been bitten?
So what they need to do is to contact us immediately. And our number is 693-2910, and that's at the National Animal Disease Center. That's the headquarters for the anti-rabies unit. So they can contact us there, and then we will follow up with an investigation, come and check everything out. If by chance the farmer, because it can happen, a person gets bitten by a vampire bat, right, or a bat, because they probably won't know what type of bat, they need to do several things. One, wash the area, the bitten area, immediately with soap and water for at least 15 minutes. And then secondly, contact the anti-rabies unit and also contact their doctor or a health center, just to make sure that all is well in terms of that exposure assessment we would conduct at that point.
Okay, now we just got a question here as well. What about bat removals? Is that something that you do when it comes to management?
Yes. Okay. One of the main ways to manage the disease, right, is to manage the vector.
Right.
We do have an overpopulation of vampire bats in Trinidad. And we have, at the anti-rabies, been conducting something that's called night trapping activities, where they go out at night in the areas where they that are known for bat biting cases,
right? Or
they go to the roosts and caves where the bats are. They will set up traps, so they catch these bats. We will then paste the bat with an anticoagulant paste, right, and then release that bat. So that bat will enter back into the roost and the cave, and the normal social behavior of bats is that they will groom this bat that has returned. About 20 or 40 other bats will come to groom him. And in doing that, nibbling and so on, they would ingest that paste as well. And it's a culling exercise, so to speak. So those animals, those bats that ingest that paste will be culled. And we found that to be very effective in controlling the population of vampire bats in Trinidad.
Is there any difference between our vampire bats in Trinidad and Tobago and those throughout the world?
Yes, there are many different types, but we only see the two that I mentioned before, the common vampire bat and the white-winged.
Now, what about transmissions to humans? I know you spoke about the infected saliva. So let's say a vampire bat bites into a fruit, for example, and somebody goes and picks the fruit afterwards and eats it. Is there a possibility for transmission there?
Well, first of all, the fruit will be bitten by a fruit bat, which is different from a vampire bat. Vampire bats, they only go for warm-blooded animals. Right? Blood meals are what they seek. So that's not a possibility, really. But in any case, what I would recommend to people, and has nothing really to do with rabies, is there are many other diseases you can get from eating a bitten fruit, whether it's bitten by a bat or other birds. There are other diseases you get, so you probably want to avoid eating those bitten fruits.
There you go. Now, we've spoken about Trinidad when it comes to farming and this issue with vampire bats. What about Tobago? Does Tobago have any issues?
Tobago has no vampire bats. Tobago has no rabies.
Wow, wonderful. That is great news to hear. So it's something that we're curbing in Trinidad. Now, you did mention, of course, there is a telephone contact if those would like some assistance when it comes to rabies. Now, what about, how long would you say the turnover time is? If a farmer calls you and says, listen, I suspect that my animal could have been bitten by rabies, how quickly do you act? I'm specifically thinking from the perspective of thinking your animal is choking and trying your best not to, go and assist.
Right. So in a choking situation, that's an emergency. So once we get that information, once we get that call in, we would send a vet out to investigate immediately, because that's an emergency. If it's not a choking situation, but it's just a bat biting case, it's a bat biting complaint, the anti-rabies unit would also either go out that same day or the very next morning and attend to that call and investigate.
Okay.
So it's a fast turnover.
Okay, that's wonderful to hear, because of course this is livelihood and it's life as well. We focused on the seeming as though the animal could be choking. What other signs of rabies should farmers look out for? Right.
So the animals will be ataxic. It'll be difficult for them to walk. So they will try to get up and they will fall back down again. You see signs like that. You would see them having difficulty breathing, some labored breathing. They would also have difficulty in drinking water. They won't be able to drink water. They won't even want to go near water, actually.
Wow.
So if you see those signs, then, you can suspect rabies and you need to call us and let us know.
All right. Now, earlier on in our conversation, I asked whether or not bats can be considered pests. And you did mention that they are very important to the environment. So can you share with us, after we've just gone through, admittedly, a bit of a dark feature of vampire bats, how good they are for our ecosystem?
Well, they help repopulate our forests because of the seed dispersal and the pollination that they do. The forest plants are kept there and thriving because of the work that they do in spreading the seedlings and so on and pollinate, to have the new species of plants growing. So they do maintain our forests,
Yeah. Now, we've spoken about farm animals and also with hunters and their dogs. Do you recommend somebody that has a hunting dog and suspects rabies goes to their regular vet, or they call the anti-rabies units?
So because hunting dogs are commonly in the forests, and we are in the hunting season right now, they are at a higher risk, and so yes, that is recommended. But just only for hunting dogs, your regular pet dog at home is at a very, very low risk for getting rabies. So I would not, expect that all persons with dogs would do that. But for the hunting dogs, that population of dogs, yes, I would recommend that they call us, because we do vaccination as well, or they visit their vets to have the dog vaccinated.
Wonderful. Dr. Musai, you mentioned the night trapping and how effective it has been. Do you think that this could possibly give us a projection of bringing down the rate of rabies in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes. Now, the night trapping only recently started, just April of this year, and it was because of an outbreak we had in February of this year, right? So it was a means to prevent any further outbreaks from happening in the near future. And so far, we've seen a reduction in bat biting, so it is making a bit of a dent, but more months of night trapping would be required for that to happen. I would say so far we've caught and pasted a little over 400 bats, and that in essence should affect about 15,000 other bats.
Okay.
Right? So we would have curbed the population to that amount so far.
And you did say it's highly effective, just given their natural way of life. So it's something that we can look forward to in the future.
Yes. Yes. So in terms of the bat transmission, we're not so worried because we're dealing with, what we can do in that area. What concerns us, though, is our porous borders at the southwest.
Ah.
Yes, because there are South American countries such as Venezuela that has rabies.
Okay.
So that illegal trade that is happening there, especially if it's happening with dogs or other livestock, is a bit concerning for us.
It is a concern, so it's something we need to look out for. Dr. Musai, our time has come to an end, but thank you so much for being with us. Before we end, can you kindly share your contact information again?
Yes, it's 693-2910, and that's at the National Animal Disease Center.
693-2910. Dr. Musai, thank you for being with us this morning and continue to do your great work.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. This is the Now Morning Show.
Famous dogs. But the dog that chases its tail